Algorithm is a step-by-step procedure which, if you follow, then out of the other end of the procedure will come a well-structured essay on virtually any topic under the sun. It requires no great writing skill. It doesn't require any specialized domain knowledge about the topic. In fact, it can be used by a high school student who, if they just follow the procedure step by step, will end up producing a sophisticated essay. This video is the first step of the ESSELGO algorithm, and it's called structured brainstorming. Okay, enough of the build up, let's dive straight into it. In the previous lecture, we identified thing 1 and thing 2. In this video, we're going to operate and deconstruct a little bit more on thing 1 and actually generate an introduction outfit. Not only that, we will discover some very interesting things along the way. But to do that, we need to take thing 1 and do some structured brainstorming. I'm sure you've heard of the word brainstorming a lot. What is brainstorming? Is it like a storm in your brain like this? Does it cause confusion? Is it supposed to be a mix of ideas which just come flooding into your mind like a storm? Not really. When we do structured brainstorming, organized ideas flood your mind in usable form. Let's take an example which you're familiar with, and we spoke about this in the previous lecture. This was from the previous year paper of the UPSC. Capitalism cannot bring inclusive growth. And so, with the topic capitalism cannot bring inclusive growth, we begin the deconstruction, and straight away we know that capitalism is thing 1 and inclusive growth is thing 2. Remember how I told you to think about thing 1 in isolation? Let's try and do that. Let's consider the word capitalism and think about whatever comes to your mind when you think about that word, capitalism. This time we are going to go into some more detail. In the last video, we thought about thing 1 and thing 2, and we worked with the images which came to our mind. Now, we are going to convert those images into words. And those words you will see will turn into points, which we will use extensively in our essay. This time, I want you to write down 12 to 15 words which come to your mind when you think about the word capitalism. Let's see what comes to my mind when I think about it. Well, for one thing, if I deconstruct the word capitalism itself, it seems to be made up of two words, capital and ism. So, capitalism must be about the philosophy of capital. And if you know what capital means, you know that capitalism must be the philosophy of owning capital, which is private ownership, where one person can own the machines and the factories and the land and other things, which are used to create the things for other people. So if one person owns all these things, they also get to keep the profit from all these things because they are also taking the risk. And this seems to be the key idea behind capitalism. What could be the opposite of this philosophy where one person cannot own these resources like machines and land and the factories? And what if they are all owned not by one individual but by society? If capitalism was the philosophy of private ownership, then socialism is the philosophy of social ownership, or when the whole community, in a sense, owns the means of production. It is called communism when the community owns it, and when Karl Marx explained this in revolutionary terms, we call it Marxism. Basically, it all means that capitalism is a sort of anti socialist philosophy, and so that was the word which I put on my list. Now, based on what you already know, this private ownership, where one person can own everything, will obviously lead to greed. And so that's the second word on my list. And if one person can be allowed to own so much, then it can create obscene amounts of wealth. And so this system will obviously produce billionaires like Jeff Bezos and Anil Ambani. And so that's the third word on my list. Jeff Bezos' net worth is around $93 billion, which is almost an unimaginable amount of money. Now, this obviously means that this system is going to produce some inequality and especially income inequality, where some people have all the money in the world and the others have nothing. I also remembered that greed caused the subprime crisis in 2008, which almost broke the world economy, and so that's the next word on my list. And don't worry if these things don't come to your mind in the same order. The important thing is just to write down the 12 to 15 words which represent thing 1 to you. So I wrote a bunch of words down which represent capitalism to me, like big corporations. But remember to always look to the other side also. Capitalism cannot be all bad. What could be the positives of capitalism? And immediately I think about the efficiency which it brings. The big malls and the cars and Amazon and Netflix are all results of capitalism. These are all private corporations. Regardless of the inequality, Amazon is pretty efficient. So someone did get rich by making these things, but they also added value to our lives by doing so. When I think about malls and the efficiency, I also think about consumerism. And it has led to consumerism where we end up buying stuff which we don't need. But it also increases comfort many times. So I put the word consumerism on my list. And then this efficiency, when it is used well, has resulted in the private hospitals and medical services which are now catering to the coronavirus pandemic. There are private corporations which are building ventilators, masks, and equipment. And they did this virtually overnight. And even now, many privately owned labs are competing for developing the coronavirus vaccine. Don't worry if your list is a little different than mine, because ultimately it will reflect the same kind of themes. And we are soon going to discover a very, very interesting pattern between them. Moving on to thing two, which is inclusive growth. And again, we need about 15 words for this. We begin deconstructing the word itself, and it is made up of two words, obviously, inclusive and growth. Sometimes this deconstruction can bring about a lot of conceptual clarity to the word itself. So, inclusive growth seems to be the kind of growth which includes. It includes all the people and sections of society. And it's kind of like the opposite idea of capitalism, where people are allowed to get extremely rich and others have very little, or so it seems for now. So inclusive growth is basically growth which includes everyone. And when does growth exclude people? And who does it exclude? Well, women for one, the most neglected section of society, historically speaking, and to think that they make up half the entire population of our species. To neglect them is to effectively reduce our progress and our strength by half. It makes no sense to me, but that's a whole other debate. Naturally, women is the first word on my list. And so, this inclusivity means that the fruits of growth, so to speak, should be shared by all. And when we saw, while we were brainstorming about capitalism, it has a lot to do with income and wealth. So, economy is the second word on my list. And the economy should be such that the fruits of this growth should be enjoyed by everyone and not just by the people on top, which is represented in the image in front of you. So, inclusive growth is better than just growth for obvious reasons. It includes more people, and just plain growth is neither desirable and nor is it beneficial. Think about cancer, for example, which is just pure growth of cells. And the cells just keep growing and multiplying without any benefit to the host. That is not the kind of growth that we need. And so that is the other word on my list, not simple growth. So, what's a place where we can actually see this kind of inclusive growth in real life? The Scandinavian countries, or Finland, Sweden, Iceland, they come to mind. And so that's a good example of inclusive growth. So I put that on the list as well. And since we are including all sections of society, what about including other species? What about other plants and animals who share this planet with us? Actually, we share it with them. And since we are the most dominant species on this planet right now, it befalls on us to look after the other species. Plants and animals all combined is called environment and ecology, and so that's the next word on my list. And so there seems to be an overarching theme of balance, which I felt is an important word, so I put the word balance on my list. And it seems that inclusiveness is quite a broad term, and inclusive growth means including many dimensions. So, many dimensions also goes on the list. There seems to be the dimension of environment and economy and society all intertwined together. They all seem to depend on each other, and inclusive growth is growth which basically caters to all of them at once, just like these triplets. I'd like to tell you that a little bit of repetition is perfectly fine. And you don't have to be super strict with yourself. Please note that you don't have to be factually correct all the time in your essay either. You can have opinions. You can disagree with many of my points, and you can think of other points of your own. In fact, you should come up with your own points. The only thing to take care of is to give reasons and examples for your opinions, because that's what matters in the essay and it will fetch you marks. And so this completes the 15-word structured brainstorming exercise for Thing 1 and Thing 2 for this topic. Now, could you try and do the same kind of exercise for another topic? Sting operation is an invasion of privacy. And this topic was in the previous year paper of the UPSC. And here are a few images to just get you started. And in the course, you will do plenty of practice, don't worry. For now, try generating 15 words each for thing 1 and thing 2